I guess, you know, personally, I would say I think we have to understand that that's part of the price to pay for, you know, doing the work we do. And I, for myself, have made a personal decision not to in any way temper my commentary or my means of communication because of what the government may or may not do. I think that this is where we are. And if we get into that situation of acting on our fears to shut our mouth, then we're pretty much done for. But anyway, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I have a question for Debra. You mentioned the difficulty of getting people in the streets, and I'm wondering what successes. I mean, what do you say? Is there something in particular you say that has worked to get people in the street?
I think people come out in the street when they feel something is completely intolerable, and when they see that there's a chance of stopping it. And I don't have any explanation for you for Ferguson, but I do know that I was on Twitter the day that Michael Brown was left laying, his body was left laying for 4.5 hours, and I did pick up on Twitter that image, and I don't know, I just felt when I saw that, this is going to be big, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
But it was the people from Ferguson that came out on the street then. Nobody came in from outside. All of us outsiders were not there.
Yeah.
They stood up.
Yeah.
And the whole world saw it, largely because of social media. The same thing with Freddie. My understanding is that people were very much consciously looking to Ferguson and what had happened in New York around Eric Garner. And all of that is welling up, and it's just too much.
Right.
I think, just if I could just, for a moment, bring up the book that I meant to mention. And I loved Anand Gopal's book, No Good Men Among the Living. But this is Edward Baptiste, who just came out with this book last year, The Half That has Never Been Told. And I think it's the best of the new crop of books on slavery that I have read. And the reason I'm bringing this up is when we are out on the streets right now, and it is very good, all these kids are coming out. But I'm finding even myself, and I've tried to study this, being really astonished at what's in this book in particular. This is how slavery, the U.S. system of chattel slavery, built the U.S. into a superpower. This is not, oh, slavery, yeah, that was so 19th century. This is how this whole system applied within the U.S. and these colonies made an unchallengeable superpower, partially through accident, but through exploitation in a very systematic way. It didn't happen in Brazil, and there were a lot more African people enslaved in Brazil. It happened here for some particular reason. And there's no person living in this country that right now doesn't have to grapple with what it means that there's still a system of enslavement. There's a system in place where black people, brown people, do not have the rights accorded to a white person. It's just not true that there's no great disparity. And so, are we, I write to tens of thousands of people every week in the World Can't Wait email list, and I hope some of you were on that list, but I get answers often to people writing back about the war, but I don't get answers back from the base of supporters much about what happened in Ferguson, what's happening in Baltimore, and I'm really struggling with why. What is it that people are not getting?
Well, could I ask, we have black people in the room here, and I would like to ask your perception of, and commentary on what we've been talking about. I think you had your hand up.
Ready to speak already?
First of all, let me not even say that I represent black people. There is a multiplicity of viewpoint and
I
positions.
wasn't asking you to do
I
that.
understand, no problem. I also want to thank you, thank the conference and the panel for raising these questions. And I want to try to just run through these few points
Please.
very quickly in order to leave time for other people. I appreciate that, and that I got called on right now as you have raised what has been very clear to many people who are activists and have studied the history of the United States. It is that the United States is in the position of wealth. Not only the United States, but the West, in its position of wealth because of indirect relationship to and because the effect of the existence of chattel slavery in this country. Having said that there needs to be I agree with many of in fact all of the short-term points that the panel has raised, the question of fascism, the question of white supremacy, all of these immediate questions. But I also think that there needs to be a fundamental change in the assumptions about the nature of the United States and its relationship to the populations within this country. And that it is not a we. This is not a we. The United States is an imperialist state not only because of what it does around the world, but what it does right here. And it has a colonial relationship with black people who've been enslaved inside this country in terms of what is now called institutionalized racism. But it is a colonial relationship. It is also a colonial relationship with the brown people who are inside of this country. And when that social, economic, political relationship is teased out, then you begin to look at how the various systems react and relate, not only in terms of what happens inside with those populations of people, but also in terms of our white allies and comrades who are part of the what might be called the oppressor nation. And so it is not our communities that are safe, it's your community that is safe. Mine has never been. I remember even in being 15 years old on Long Island and the murder of Larry Blaylock in Roosevelt, Long Island, when we resisted. So this question of the role of the police has always and forever been the role of an occupying force. And when we resisted, then they brought the drugs in. The iron fist and the velvet glove. There is a direct relationship between the question of drugs coming into the country and its use. The same way there were the opium wars in China, there's the drug war here. Moving on. So that this question of mercenaries and how the impact of U.S. military in Afghanistan, same thing here. You got folks who are going over there because they can't find a job here. So they'll agree to be a mechanic and make hundreds of thousands of dollars to be a mechanic or in connected with the U.S. military, where they would never consider that before, but they couldn't find a job here, so they considered going, and they're called what here? Contractors. No, they're mercenaries. Mercenaries. Third point. Anti-war. We got to get past fighting against systems, mechanized systems or weapon systems. I worked for American Service Committee. At that time, in the mid-'80s, it was the B-52 bomber. Oh, we got to go against the B-52 bomber. Then it was whatever the latest nuclear weapons, whatever. Now it's drones. It is simply the latest development of technology. We got to oppose all of it. As Glenn Ford said, the weapon systems develop out of the development of technology of imperialism. If you don't deal with this question of this cause of this thing in the first place, you're going to be running after system after system after system after system. You're going to have an anti-war movement that's going to raise the latest country, the latest this, the latest that, but you haven't dealt with the crux of it. And this is why people call this the beast here. please, and this panel did not make the mistake. I want to raise this point. I want to raise it for the entire conference. They are not simply just young black men who are being shot down the street. They are young black men, women, and children. There are lists and lists of women who are being shot down in the streets and nobody is talking about it. There are men, women, and children. Do not fall into the kind of patriarchal thinking, the divide and conquer thinking that is being projected out here. And lastly, again, I intentionally started with thank you for the panel and clearly agree with many of the points. However, changing the difference in a perspective in terms of the view of how do we deal with the nature of the United States. But however, even in this conference, even in this panel, the composition of this panel, I don't doubt any sincerity. Please understand where I'm coming from. But to be the spokesperson for Stop and Frisk, where are the young black men in this panel? Where are the people who are active?
We did invite a Reverend Sekou and he couldn't make it.
I understand the intention, but the end result is that the composition of the panel still is not reflective.
But may I add that when I agreed to be on the panel, my understanding was that Reverend Sekou was on the panel.
But that's one person out of 4, and please don't be defensive about the point I'm making. I am not doubting their sincerity, the experiences, okay, the thought put into analyzing your experience, your courage. No question about that at all. But I do raise that when we walk in here and we're talking about the globalization of the police force, state terror, the victims, the actual continually daily victims of that state terror, whether it's within the so-called U.S. borders or outside the border, their voice is not here, okay? And that is not a criticism of you individually. It's a criticism of how, when people talk about the anti-war movement, we've got to deal with the crux of the matter and make space for the voice of the people who are actively being affected. And when that comes forward, when those people come forward, then that question of who's out in the street, gets addressed. Those people, that's who will lead that and set the tone and the direction. Again, this is not a personal criticism. It's not a criticism of courage. I applaud it. I respect it. I thank you for it.